So the Supreme Court recently granted review to the next big Second Amendment case, and once again it deals with state concealed carry restrictions, and now the Trump DOJ has submitted their brief in support of striking down these concealed carry laws, and they also just asked for the Supreme Court to allow them to participate during the oral arguments. So this is great news. So let's talk about what is happening in this critical 2A case that is probably going to be the next 2A landmark case out of the Supreme Court. Now, before we jump into this video, if you guys want to support the channel, one of the best ways to do that and one of the free ways to do that is simply to subscribe to the channel. I also want to thank one of the main supporters of this channel, which is Attorneys on Retainer. When it comes to self-defense protection, in my opinion, AOR is in a league of their own. They're backed by an actual law firm, and they're always expanding upon their benefits. Like right now, they added a new benefit to where if you're a member and you have a self-defense case, they will guarantee 4 attorneys for your case. That is something that no one else can promise. So if you're interested, check them out using my link down below. And if you use my code ARMEDSCHOLAR, you can get $50 off of your individual plan or $25 off of a family plan. Now, as I mentioned in the intro, in this video, we're going to be talking about the next big 2A case that was recently granted review by the Supreme Court and will be ruled on. And once again, this deals with state concealed carry restrictions in a case called Woolford versus Lopez. This case is huge for everyone in states like New York, New Jersey, California, Hawaii, and others who are currently living under these laws, which attempt to ban concealed carry even after the Supreme Court's Bruin ruling. The Hawaii Woolford case sought emergency Supreme Court intervention, which surprisingly was granted by the Supreme Court. This challenge revolves around a preliminary injunction, and the Ninth Circuit ultimately finding that Hawaii's catch-all public property ban for concealed carry is permissible even under the Second Amendment. Recently, to the surprise of many, the DOJ and AG Bondi actually stepped up in support of this challenge, and they called the state's ban a violation of the Second Amendment, and they pushed for the Supreme Court to break their track record of denying these emergency cases, and they asked for the Supreme Court to address this issue. And that was great news because ultimately I think it did lead to the Supreme Court granting review to this case. And once again, the Trump DOJ has stepped up in support of this case. They filed an amicus brief in support of this challenge, asking for this state concealed carry law to be struck down. And now they're also asking to participate during the oral arguments in this case. Now, if you're not aware, the Woolford case is a challenge to Hawaii's new laws on concealed carry passed in direct response to Bruin. This law, like others, tried to add more restrictions to concealed carry and create a default rule where individuals can carry firearms on private property only if the owner of that property provides express permission to do so. Plaintiffs, along with 2A organizations, sought to strike down that law. They filed a lawsuit in a district court. They asked for a preliminary injunction, and that was granted. So it temporarily blocked this law in the state of Hawaii. Well, that was then appealed to the Ninth Circuit, and the Ninth Circuit on review, reviewed the case and still ruled in favor of the state of Hawaii. They reviewed this case along with a California concealed carry ban case, but they ruled in favor of this catch-all property ban that was in place in Hawaii. After that, the plaintiffs asked for the Ninth Circuit en banc panel to review that case, but it was denied, and that then led this case to seek emergency Supreme Court intervention. And now the Supreme Court has granted review to this case, and they will hold oral arguments in this challenge on January 20th. Now, the question that the Supreme Court will address in this case is whether the Ninth Circuit erred in holding in direct conflict with the Second Circuit that Hawaii may presumptively prohibit the carry of handguns by licensed concealed carry permit holders on private property open to the public unless the property owner affirmatively gives express permission to the handgun carrier. That means that the Supreme Court will directly address the catch-all property bans that were passed in direct defiance to what they already said in Bruin. Now, one of the critical things that may have led the Supreme Court to take this case on review is that prior DOJ brief when there was a petition that was filed. And once again, the Trump DOJ is jumping in support of the 2A effort. They recently submitted an amicus brief arguing that the ultimate decision of the Supreme Court should be to strike down this catch-all property ban and that it is inconsistent with the Second Amendment and the history and tradition in the United States. The first thing that they argued is that Hawaii's affirmative consent rule actually violates the Second Amendment because it was designed purely to actually suppress concealed carry within the state. They argue that the law in question was not aiming to actually abide by Bruin or what the Supreme Court said in some of their precedent. Instead, it has a hidden agenda of simply frustrating 2A rights. They argue that Hawaii already has a bunch of laws that protect property rights of owners, and that is under things like traditional trespass laws, and property owners could already kind of forbid firearms simply by posting a sign that said no guns allowed. But this default ban is not about actually protecting property rights like Hawaii is claiming. Instead, it is all about making public carry practically impossible in direct defiance to what the Supreme Court said. And they point out in that amicus brief that this law and its structure amounts to almost a near complete ban on concealed carry. Every business within the state of Hawaii will be covered under this language. And they also point out that the people who helped to actually draft this law already admitted that very few business owners would actually opt in to this whole structure to post a sign saying that concealed carry is permitted. And because of that, that means that this law really was not intended to protect property rights, but instead simply expand gun-free zones to almost everywhere within the state of Hawaii. Now, after the Trump DOJ submitted that amicus brief, I actually stated in the prior video that I believed that the Trump DOJ would ask to participate in the oral arguments in this case, and they would try to argue on behalf of the pro-2A side. And that is exactly what has now happened. In a recent motion, the Trump DOJ actually asked the Supreme Court to participate during those January oral arguments. In that motion, they state that the United States respectfully moves that the United States be granted leave to participate in the oral arguments in this case, and that the time be allotted as follows: 20 minutes for the petitioner, 10 minutes for the U.S., and 30 minutes for the respondents. Counsel for petitioners consent to this motion. They argue that this case presents the question whether the Second Amendment allows a state to make it unlawful for concealed carry license holders to carry firearms on private property open to the public without the property owner's express authorization. At the certiorari stage, the United States filed a brief as amicus curiae, arguing that this court should grant review. Now at the merit stage, the United States has filed a brief arguing that the challenged state statute here violates the Second Amendment. The United States has a substantial interest in the preservation of the right to keep and bear arms and in the proper interpretation of the Second Amendment. The United States previously presented oral arguments as amicus curiae in another Second Amendment case. The United States' participation in oral argument could materially assist this court in its consideration of this case. Therefore, they asked for the Supreme Court to allow them to participate during the oral arguments. So this is great news, and it would likely be beneficial to have the Trump administration on our side during those oral arguments. It will likely sway the justices probably even more to rule in a pro-2A way, and it would just be a good, optics for having the Trump DOJ on our side during those arguments, and maybe even sway or swing some of those, neutral or outlier justices who maybe don't want to rule in a pro-2A way. This case will be huge because it will be another case where the Supreme Court performs the Bruin text, history, and tradition analysis, and it will impact a lot of other cases going forward. So we need all the help that we can get, and the Trump DOJ being present during the oral arguments, being on our side, arguing on our behalf would help the decision here, land in a way that we actually want, and doesn't hurt us down the road when it comes to other 2A cases. So this is huge for the Second Amendment movement. This term, the Supreme Court will once again hear a critical Second Amendment case and rule once again on concealed carry restrictions. And it's a good thing that we have the Trump DOJ on our side. And hopefully, I would anticipate actually that the Supreme Court would allow them to, participate during those arguments. And, that would be great because we would get even more support on our side to get the Supreme Court to rule in a pro-2A way. So that is what's happening currently in this critical Supreme Court case, dealing with another Second Amendment issue, dealing with concealed carry restrictions once again. And like I said, even though this deals with concealed carry and kind of the Bruin analysis, this will impact a lot of other 2A cases going forward. So as we get more information, as it develops more, I will let you guys know. If you like this video and you would like to support the channel, one of the best ways to do that is simply to like, comment, and subscribe. You can also check out one of the 2 videos here on the screen that the YouTube algorithm thinks that you'll find helpful. But as always, thank you guys so much for all of your support. And never forget, this nation was built by armed scholars, and this nation will be maintained by armed scholars.